Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Maeve Sneddon, and I'm the Program Assistant at the Aspen Tech Policy Hub. For those of you who are new to us, we are a policy incubator training scientists and technologists on how to engage with the policy process. I'm thrilled to welcome you all today to our fourth and final demonstration day of the third cohort of our full-time fellowship program. Our fellowship program welcomes 15 members in each cohort who spend 10 weeks learning full-time with us about policymaking and policy advocacy, both inside and outside of government. This cohort started their time with us in September of 2021 and ended their fellowship in late November. Over the course of their 10 weeks with us, the fellows spent time applying their new policy skills to projects of their own choosing. In just 10 weeks, they each identified a policy problem they were passionate about, researched the problem space, identified their stakeholders, conducted interviews, developed solutions, and created projects in aid of their solution. This cohort's projects span everything from contractor worker compensation in tech companies to strengthening data privacy protections for public school students. Today, we're happy to present 3 of these projects to you, which focus on equipping vulnerable communities for 21st century needs. Households across the country are facing more complex digital needs than ever before. As schools make greater use of education technology tools, students are exposed to widespread data collection without adequate protection. As remote learning becomes increasingly common, access to reliable home internet connection has become a necessity. And as cities move towards more sustainable energy models, citizens will be left with higher electric bills. How can we ensure that vulnerable communities are prepared for these modern challenges? Before we get started, I have a few logistical notes on today's event. We will first hear from the 3 fellows who are presenting their projects. Then we're thrilled to welcome Nick Sinai, Senior Advisor at Insight Partners, Senior Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School, and former Deputy White House CTO to give keynote remarks. We'll then open it up to Q&A for Nick and the fellows. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions for the group. Throughout the program, we'll also be sharing links to our fellows' products via the chat box, so please keep an eye out there as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our first fellow, Elijah Blackwell, who will present a cross-sector plan for building more comprehensive student data protections. Elijah is a researcher and creative technologist working across the social impact sector to advance equity and is currently working with the Natural Resources Defense Council as a transition design fellow. Elijah is also piloting a culturally responsive learning intervention about children's digital rights using interactive game design as a member of the U.S. Department of Education Office of Educational Technologies Digital Literacy Accelerator. We're so excited for you all to hear about this project, and over to you, Elijah.
Wonderful. So the central question that I've explored across this fellowship is how do we foster data agency with students on EdTech platforms? My proposal is an ecosystem approach for the EdTech industry and government to create more comprehensive data protection policies that foster student data sovereignty and agency. In the transition to digital learning throughout the pandemic, Google has become a designated school official in over 85% of US schools, given the widespread adoption of Google's suite of education tools and Chromebooks in classrooms. It's alarming how Google has become a critical part of our school's infrastructure, given Google's history of repeatedly violating minors' fundamental rights, where most recently they settled a historic federal lawsuit for violating child data protections, and New Mexico's Attorney General has sued Google for collecting children's data without parental consent on their education platforms. Today, Google for Education collects the data of over 120 million students and teachers, which means that EdTech developers are incentivized to leverage Google's APIs to integrate with its platform, and it similarly exposes them to extractive data collection practices. The harms of student data profiling become apparent when we consider the adversarial or unintended uses of student data, which can limit the future economic mobility of students, as their data that is collected on these platforms is often used to inform hiring decisions or higher education decisions as well. It can be used to be shared with law enforcement officials to grow the school to prison pipeline for predictive policing programs. And increasingly today, student data is targeted by ransomware attacks and results in data breaches more often than not. Most concerning is the potential long-term impacts that student data profiling can have on child development. To mitigate these harms, we have the opportunity to practice foresight, given what we know about the history of student data violations, to take an ecosystem approach across government and industry. For the state of New Mexico, I have developed an operational plan for the New Mexico Public Education Department to establish a student data protection office that oversees the implementation of EdTech, of student data protection agreements within EdTech vendor contracts, as well as data sovereignty plan templates that can be used to protect student data for tribal education departments and local education agencies, as well as school capacity building materials and presentations that can be used for training and professional development to ensure students, parents, caregivers, and teachers know how to exercise their digital rights. For the U.S. Department of Education, I have developed a template notice of funding to support the funding of efficacy research and equity impact assessments of educational technologies to ensure that we understand the long-term impacts on student data protections, learning outcomes, and student well-being. For industry and EdTech developers, I've created a tool via Miro to ensure student data protection by design is implemented throughout the product development process. Using this tool, EdTech developers can map student journeys and parent and caregiver journeys throughout their applications and identify potential data protection risks to mitigate student data protection harms. I'm encouraged by the historic investments expanding access to broadband internet and school cybersecurity programs, especially here in the state of New Mexico, and their strong momentum nationwide as over 40 states have student data protection laws that are working towards ensuring safer digital learning environments. I encourage you to visit Securing Our Digital Encantos, a website and for school capacity building materials, specifically for New Mexico stakeholders. And you can enjoy a digital movements playlist about our relationship with technology and the potential impacts that it may have. Thank you so much, and back to you, Maeve.
Thanks so much, Elijah, for your really thoughtful project. I especially appreciate the cross-sector approach that Elijah took with this project, including the voices of students, parents, and federal departments of education and state departments of education. And as a reminder, please use the Q&A function to ask any questions about Elijah's project, and please check out the links in the chat box to learn more. Next up, I'm thrilled to introduce Sage Salvo, who seeks to help disconnected households get online through the creation of a new position within public school systems, the Community Youth Broadband Technicians, to offer dedicated tech support. Sage is the founder and CEO of Words Live, a reading app that helps teachers improve classroom engagement through customizable lesson plans. Sage is also the founder and president of Opus World, a DC-based nonprofit delivering K-12 innovative K-12 learning solutions. He also teaches social innovation and entrepreneurship in higher education, currently at Montgomery College and Prince George's Community College. We're delighted to share Sage's work with you. Over to you, Sage.
Thank you, Maeve. I'm glad to be here and share my work with Aspen. My project, EdTech Access for All, was done in conjoint with Elijah Blackwell, who you just heard from. And so I'm happy to discuss some of our findings. Our large and surprising takeaway here was a Hechinger report that listed that over 3 million kids went absent during the pandemic. And the reason why this is so troubling is because they weren't able to access school resources. They were not able to be counted as present and had a long-term absence. They also couldn't receive and distribute any of the school work. So we know that the pandemic highlighted a very large disconnect in who has internet and broadband access at home and who doesn't. And unfortunately, over the past 2 years, that has meant for some students who are able to succeed and matriculate through school and who's left behind, resulting in what the industry has called COVID loss. And so we're here to think deeply about some of the reasons why students don't have access at home and how we can remedy some of these issues here. So the central question becomes, how do we best enable access to at-home ed tech, access for K through 12 low-income BIPOC communities? These communities are largely and disproportionately hit when things like a pandemic happen and school needs to go offline and resources need to be available in the home for a student to continue their education. And so there's some reasons that we examined as to why certain programs didn't work. We looked at some of the things being done in Baltimore, such as the Internet Society's work, some of the things being done in San Jose, like the San Jose City Community Tech Program, even large organizations like the Education Superhighway, all attempting to figure out how to make sure students have internet and broadband access at home. And what we found were some nuanced challenges, things around trust and folks not being trustworthy of internet service providers coming into their homes, things around billing transparency. And ultimately, though, there's a comfort level with who some families may have a language barrier and just some other cultural barriers that when it comes to someone actually coming into their home and installing equipment, troubleshooting, and working with the family. We call that the last mile delivery challenge. So you hear that term pop back up. And what it resulted in is an idea that said that we need the community to be at the forefront of making sure we solve for raising awareness of available programs and actually delivering the services into the home. And so the idea came to us as a community youth broadband technician. This would be a national program that's going to bridge the divide to residential, the residents of the students so they can maintain access to the education curriculum. The relevant stakeholders that we need to engage here are the U.S. Department of Education and the Federal Communications Commission. In particular, through the Education Stabilization Fund, we're asking the U.S. Department of Education to fund the training and salaries of the youth technicians, and with the Federal Communications Commission to extend their current E-rate program into students' residents and also manage the ISPs, which are the internet service providers, management of the student work. You hear a little bit more about the E-rate program. Now, the deliverables under this project were both a community youth broadband technician operational plan, which we have available, policy letters to Department of Education, the FCC, and the internet service providers, and a designed E-rate at residents mobile app. This is a mobile application to help families gain access to youth technicians and to make sure those youth technicians get effectively deployed into the homes. First of all, a little backdrop on why E-rate. E-rate is currently being used as funded and resourced through the FCC for schools and libraries. So about a decade and a half ago, we realized that we wanted at least universal service at the school site level and at the library level. So the FCC is already used to and has already had predecessors when it comes to a national program to install internet service. So we're looking to expand that particular program at the residence and at the door-to-door level. To do that, we're going to need the FCC to provide billing support. They do that with schools and libraries now, but we're going to have to sort of reformat that if this is going to work to responding to residents' billing inquiries. Likewise, the FCC supervises the internet service providers who will be responsible in actually training and supervising the work of the youth technicians. And then lastly, the U.S. Department of Education funding the hiring and the application process of identifying those youth across the country who will serve as our youth community technicians. So now we'll just do a quick little demo of the design and looking at how easy it can be for us to implement this program here. So you're seeing Get Connected. This would be just the front face of the application here. Again, that CYBT is just Community Youth Broadband Technician. We're looking at sort of two tracks here. There's the billing support and the request of the technician. We're going to split those two functions apart. So here you would just click your billing support and it would take you to a dedicated hotline. The FCC currently under USAC has the HATS hotline. It's just a hotline schools and libraries use, but this here is what residents would do to call in and get information on their bills. Then there's a request to technician function, probably the main function here, which is when you need your service activated, you'll be able to select and it would give you the available youth, and these will be youth at the high school that are available to come. You simply schedule with that youth. The benefit here is that becomes a dedicated person, a trusted person that's been curated by both the school and the family, so that that youth, that teenager, will be able to come in and should be familiar with your student, hopefully have some familiarity with your student there. And so that is how easy we can implement a solution that can, I think go very, very far in solving what's called the last mile delivery of that tech at home service. So thanks again, and I look forward to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Sage, for showcasing your proposal for the creation of the Community Youth Broadband Technician Program. And I especially appreciate how this project focuses on the community level solutions to closing the digital divide. Feel free to check out the chat to learn more about Sage's project. Next up, I'm thrilled to introduce Dylan Cruz, who will be showcasing his project on how Los Angeles can deploy energy storage to reduce energy burden on disadvantaged communities. Dylan is a senior software engineer at Google, and previously he worked at Sidewalk Labs, where he designed sensors to improve city streets. Dylan has also led a nonprofit in partnership with the city of San Francisco that provided free wireless internet to thousands of unhoused individuals. Over to you, Dylan.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Dylan Cruz, and I'm an engineer at Google working to make cities more sustainable. Today, I want to talk to you about how the city of Los Angeles can make energy bills more affordable for their low-income residents. Before we get started, I just want to note that this project received a ton of guidance and support from my fellow Hub Fellows, Micah Mutrix and Michael Rain, as well as from this wonderful staff at the Tech Policy Hub. Let me give you a preview of what we're going to discuss. First, I'll recommend that the city of LA immediately implements a new pilot program called Virtual Net Energy Metering Plus, which would bring the benefits of energy storage to low-income renters. Then I'm going to recommend that the city deploys 150 megawatts of energy storage within LA's disadvantaged communities by 2030. Last year, nearly 30% of LA households had trouble paying for their energy bills. Most of these households are concentrated in neighborhoods like South LA, which is pictured here in the background. These neighborhoods are low income, non-white, non-English speaking, and often home to some serious inequities across the environmental, health, and economic spheres. LA is deeply aware of these struggling residents. So the question is, how can LA help them while still fighting climate change? If LA succeeds in running on 100% clean energy by 2035, which is that headline shown on the top right, energy bills could actually increase by up to 80%. With low-income families already dealing with stagnated wages and rising inflation, an 80% increase in energy bills would be quite hard for them to stomach. So this is where energy storage comes in. Energy storage is any technology that can store energy and dispatch it whenever and wherever needed. You can imagine batteries that are large enough to power entire buildings. If households can get their hands on an energy storage system, along with a solar power system, that can make their bills cheaper, their homes resilient to blackouts, and their energy cleaner with less emissions. So that's why I think LA should accelerate adoption of local energy storage within its communities, and then it do so using the following recommendations. First, LA should implement Virtual Net Energy Metering Plus. This program would incentivize energy storage for multifamily apartment buildings by enabling the city of LA to pay the owners of those buildings for energy that they dispatch into the grid. This would benefit one of the hardest to reach demographics in energy policy, renters. Renters are hard to reach because first, they have less money, typically, and less access to financing. So it's hard for them to invest in things like efficient appliances, solar panels, and storage. Second, renters don't have the final say over building renovations. Landlords do. But the third obstacle is that landlords who do have the money and power for building renovations simply aren't affected by tenant energy bills. So landlords have no reason to renovate their buildings unless they're legally forced to. In light of these obstacles, I've designed this pilot program as follows. First, Owners of multifamily apartment buildings install solar and storage systems. Then they dispatch pretty much all of the energy they generate directly into LA's electric grid. Lastly, LA pays both the owners and the renters for all energy dispatched. Importantly, whatever LA pays is split. So at least 40% of revenue would be given directly to tenants, and at most 60% would go directly to the owner. This program appeals to owners because it still helps them turn a profit on their solar and storage investment within years. And of course, this program appeals to renters because they don't pay for the solar and storage installation, but they still benefit from lower bills and cleaner, more resilient energy. Solar and storage is expensive to install. So to further incentivize owners to participate, LA can also leverage a practice used elsewhere, in which payouts vary according to periods of peak energy demand. If the owner dispatches energy in the winter at 9 p.m., LA pays double. But LA pays triple for energy dispatch in the summer at 6 p.m. This signals to owners that they should hold on to solar power generated in the middle of the day using their battery storage, and then dispatch that energy when it's most needed by the grid. Overall, renters and owners win here. The city of LA also wins with the increase of privately installed solar and storage systems. LA knows it needs greater adoption of storage because the city will soon need a way to power its grid while removing its reliance on coal and gas, including at times when the sun isn't shining and the winds aren't blowing. This long-term thinking brings us to our second recommendation, which is that LA should target 150 megawatts of local energy storage within its disadvantaged communities by 2030. This is triple its current target of 50 megawatts, a target which does not allocate any storage explicitly for disadvantaged communities. And a note on terminology, disadvantaged communities is actually a technical term defined by the California EPA, denoting communities with high levels of poverty, pollution, and health issues. Disadvantaged communities in LA are also more likely to have aging grid assets like crumbling power lines and aging transformers. So our ask to LA for this recommendation is twofold. First, I want LA to incorporate this 150 megawatt target into its strategic long-term resource plan, which is a plan by the LA Department of Water and Power that maps out the energy assets like wind, solar, storage, natural gas, that it would need to meet predicted energy demand over the next 15 years. Second, I want LA to work with community advocates and organizers through the LA 100 Equity Strategies initiative that it already has, to craft policies that ensure that greater adoption of storage means better socioeconomic outcomes for disadvantaged communities. Policies to accelerate storage adoption would span a number of topic areas. This includes inclusive financing. How might LA expand access to financing options so that any LA resident, even those with low income, can obtain solar and storage systems and install them at their residences? Could LA redesign its electricity rates to support these types of programs, such as higher income homes subsidizing installations for lower income homes? How about revisiting technical limitations, like allowing multiple homes to share a battery, or speeding up the time it takes to onboard a new energy system? If LA could figure it out, the benefits of this recommendation would mean $20 million in payments to low-income households annually, as well as backup power for 400,000 low-income homes during a blackout. It also would mean $25 million in returns to the city because the city avoids having to upgrade aging grid assets because storage can render some infrastructure investments obsolete. And lastly, this is actually enough capacity to replace 3 peaker power plants, which are highly polluting, very expensive, and terrible for the health of the mostly BIPOC communities that live around them in LA. So to close out, there is a ton of untapped potential for energy storage to make people's lives better. There's a reason why the Biden administration and California policymakers are investing billions of dollars into energy storage. So as LA continues to deploy its existing tool set of energy efficiency, solar generation, and direct financial assistance to make energy bills more affordable, the city should consider adding energy storage to this toolkit. In the coming months, I'll be presenting these recommendations to the LA Department of Water and Power, including an operational plan that outlines the virtual net energy meeting plan I talked about, as well as a draft resolution that the LA Board of Water and Power Commissioners should adopt to make it official. In addition, I'll be conversing with community organizers and energy justice advocates to ensure that energy storage is in the back of their minds as they champion low-income communities. And if any of you know such advocates, please reach out, as I'm hoping to gather signatures for a letter of support on this topic. Thank you for your time, everyone, and I'll pass it back to you, Maeve.
Thank you so much, Dylan. What I like most about your project is its inclusion not only of materials for the LA Department of Water and Power, but also for organizers and activists on the ground, recognizing the importance of stakeholders at all levels. And to learn more about Dylan's project, please check out the links in the chat. And I also want to note that we are going to be turning to all of your questions very soon, so please do submit them in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for today's event, Nick Sinai. Nick Sinai is a senior advisor at Insight Partners, where he works with portfolio companies entering and growing in the public sector. Nick is also a board member at Rebellion Defense, Leo Labs, Shift 5, and Bright Bites. Nick joined Insight in 2014 from the White House, where he was Deputy Chief Technology Officer. While at the White House, Nick led President Obama's open data initiatives, co-authored President Obama's 2013 executive order, making open and machine readable the default for new government information, led the relaunch of data.gov, and was a national advocate for open government data. Nick also helped start and grow the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, which brings entrepreneurs and technologists into government. Nick is also an adjunct faculty and senior fellow at the Belfer Center at Harvard Kennedy School, where he has taught an award-winning field course on technology and innovation in government. He also helped found the U.S. Digital Corps, a 2-year federal fellowship for early career technologists. Nick will provide us with some comments and context about these projects and our program as a whole. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Maeve. Can you hear me? Excellent. Wow, what a fantastic set of proposals. And the context I have here is I spent 5.5 years in the Obama administration in policy writing functions at the FCC as part of the National Broadband Plan, and then 4 years in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And I now teach at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I have a good perspective on what it takes to write useful and powerful policy, not just ideas, but plans. And what I see here, what was presented today, and also what I see online is just first rate in a variety of capacities in terms of outlining the challenge, thinking creatively about the solution and how the various stakeholders, and being super detailed in a concise way. I think that's one of the challenges with policy proposals. They're always coming at you especially when you're in the White House, and to have them with these operational plans and these very thoughtful templates and guides to the regulator or to the activist or advocacy group. Just absolutely loved the 3 proposals I saw today. I'll give a couple minutes reaction on each one of those, if that's helpful, and then maybe some concluding remarks. So Elijah, I loved your proposal. The 40 laws in these states show that this is something that the states are really caring about, and you outlined a set of harms and impressive statistics about this. It would have been even better to, I was just fascinated. I wanted to hear more about the harms and how families are feeling those harms. And I'm sure we're limited by time to kind of go even deeper in that. I really appreciated the assessments, the focus on standards, which oftentimes policymakers miss, and the detailed plan of what a state level office would look like. And so I thought that was fantastic. I was wondering about precedent. Are there other state level offices, or maybe even in other countries like Germany, I know has state level data protection offices. really well done. I love the focus on capacity building and the cross sector approach. Sage, on the E-rate proposal, I have a confession to make. Is I worked on E-rate expansion when I served in the White House with a number of other folks, and so I have a soft spot in my mind, my heart, for the power of E-rate, and I love this focus on let's go where the students and their families are to make where they are learning. And as the father of 9-year-old twin girls, I can appreciate how much learning gets done at home today. Really appreciated the focus on the language and cultural barriers, and this idea of communities helping solve some of their own challenges. I immediately was drawn to this question of how would we vet and train the youth. I'm sure you're thinking through that in your detailed operational plan. And I love the demo of an actual app. It's just great to see what that user experience would look like. And I'm sure that would continue to iterate as you get great feedback, as you learned in the field about what was working. But that focus on the user or household or family experience was really great. Dylan, I have a confession for you as well, in that I did do a little smart grid policy. At least I started there in my policymaking career at the FCC, and then in my early years in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And so this proposal for virtual net metering is also one that I have a great fondness for. I liked the way that you showed the financial incentives, both in terms of the challenges as well as the solution for splitting some of the economic returns. And this idea of how can we not only solve the capacity challenge, but also the peak usage or peak demand problem is super important. It's not just about adding capacity, as you well know, and as you articulated so nicely. It is about delivering energy back into the grid during those peak summer and winter hours. And you have a great approach, thoughtful approach for incenting folks to deliver or dispatch energy back into the grid when it's needed the most, which can help on so many of those challenges, including reducing those usage of those peaker plants, which contribute to asthma and other health conditions. The other thing that I appreciate, Dylan, was the way that you speak the language of the regulator. That is, what is their 15-year plan for grid assets, and thinking about how you can draft that kind of information that helps them with their long-range planning efforts. The grid policy is definitely one of those ones that kind of has this multi-year flavor to it, with lots of input. And so your preparation of those materials directly, as well as getting other stakeholders to carry some water and be forceful advocates, I also really appreciated. The one area where I would have liked to hear a little bit more might have been on the actual storage side. I assume that these are pretty standard commercial batteries that you're thinking about, but it might have been nice to understand how you're thinking about both the battery as well as the dispatch of that energy back into the grid. All three proposals were fantastic, thoughtful, detailed, communicated succinctly, with a wealth of materials that I can see online. So I am definitely in awe. In fact, I'm already thinking about, well, how could I showcase some of these at the Harvard Kennedy School as an example of policy making that is tangible. And I think that's where I want to kind of shift my remarks to and conclude with. When you're a busy policymaker, inside of an executive office of the president, policy council, or if you're up on the Hill, you have so many things coming at you. You have so many meetings, and policy that is written succinctly and is just super practical, well sourced, is just very useful as you build your case internally and externally. And I think that's one of the things that I always come back to is, policy making and policy implementation takes a village. And it's actually the theme of a book I'm working on now with my co-author, Marina Nitsa, coming out in September. About the book is titled Hack Your Bureaucracy. And it's fundamentally, whether you're talking about policy making, policy implementation, or just being successful in any organization, public or private, is, it takes momentum. It takes other people to believe in you and believe in your ideas. And that's something that I believe strongly in, that, these types of things take hard work, attention to detail, repetition, and ultimately start to build momentum. And so, we had a saying in the Office of Science and Technology Policy that you can get more done if you don't care who takes credit. And the more folks that take credit for your particular idea, who think that they had some role, and oftentimes they do have some role, because it takes a lot of folks to make something happen at scale, whether you're talking about policy inside the federal or state government, or whether you're talking about change inside a bureaucracy, an organization, a corporation, a nonprofit, even in a large university. It takes a number of people to pitch in. And so to remove blockers and to ultimately help turn ideas into lasting impact. And so I'm a big fan, not just of ideas, but of the people, because it's the people that ultimately take these ideas and turn them into real sustainable change. And I just adore what you all are doing at the Aspen Tech Policy Hub. These 3 proposals are just top notch. And I am delighted to spend the rest of this time with you to answer any questions you may have for me. But really, this will be fun to talk with the panelists and hear more from them. So over to you, Maeve.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick, for these words of wisdom. And we really appreciate you sharing your perspective on writing and doing policy successfully and sustainably. And we are impressed that you have a connection to or seem to have worked on all of these topics that our fellows are discussing in the past. So thanks so much again for sharing your thoughts with us. And now I want to bring back all of the speakers from today's event for our open Q&A session. And as a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the Q&A box. So while we are bringing up the other speakers, Nick, I'm going to turn my first question to you. Do you have any advice for our fellows for pitching their solutions, given your expertise on working on these issues in government in the past?
The biggest piece of advice is precedent, right? So what is an example of another city that has tried this in Dylan's example? In Elijah's example, maybe there isn't another state that has established this, but pointing to the German city states that have very similar data protection offices, right? And so that this question of precedent, nobody likes to really go first, as much as everyone thinks they are innovators and disruptors and so forth. There's always a need to see, show me someone who has done something in a similar capacity or in some analog. And then there's always this question of, well, who else supports this? And policymakers inside and outside of the executive and legislative branch are always mentally calculating, is this the first time we've heard this idea, or is there a growing coalition for this? And so to the extent that you can credibly represent that you are part of a larger coalition and you're getting broad buy-in for this idea, that's always going to be powerful.
Awesome. And on the topic of precedents, Elijah, this question's for you. So we got a question that your project is focused on New Mexico specifically, but have you seen or do you have any other examples of other states who have implemented some of the recommendations you've made successfully?
Thank you, Maeve. Yes, absolutely. The California state law called the Student Online Personal Information Protection Act, or SOPIPA, came into effect in 2015, and it's been used to inform 20 of the 40 state laws related to student data protection today. Also, the Student Data Privacy Consortium, which is a collaborative of school districts, educational marketplace vendors, trade organizations, and public sector officials, established a national data privacy agreement that's being used by 31 states, with over 60,000 agreements that have been signed by edtech vendors and marketplace vendors too. So these have all been really affirming and encouraging models that states can follow and that have definitely informed, a lot of the proposals and recommendations that I have for New Mexico.
Really, it's great to hear that other people are doing good work on this too. Sage, this next question is for you. We got a question from the former CIO of Colorado and a current volunteer with US Digital Response, who says, who knows that this broadband issue is one that many communities have and is wondering what traction you're getting with the FCC and the Department of Education, and how could organizations like US Digital Response or Broadband Hub help you out, and have you talked to those types of organizations?
Yeah, so there are a few orgs that I hope I mentioned, I may have skipped over, that we know that are doing some of this work on the ground. And I want to sort of connect to a comment questions as well. So the proposal here is to fund through the federal level, but to actually implement at the state and local level. And the mechanism there would be that the actual school or the state would do the application process for the students in question, or the identified students who will become the trained technicians there. And I think that's where the model differs from some of the other work that's being done with other organizations. We've seen a lot of organizations do a train the trainer model, where they want to just train students so that they can kind of become their own in-home technician. I think that has a lot of legs to it as well. But a lot of some of the other programs that we mentioned, they're training folks who are not quite in the community. And I think the magic here is that we're looking at who is most proximate to the problem, and then to build capacity right there on the spot. So yeah, there are a few organizations that we've looked at. We're really trying to push for traction through that education stabilization fund that has so much of a surplus right now that they can fund and get down to the local level, that we can make those actions.
So thank you. And Dylan, this question is for you. Could you speak to whether your recommendations discuss the implications for medically vulnerable populations? Specifically, this person is imagining energy storage could be really relevant to critical facilities like hospitals, nursing homes, other areas, especially during power outages.
Yeah, there are actually a couple of dimensions with which this touches on health for these communities that I'm hoping to deploy this energy storage in. The first is that I found a statistic, which is that thousands of folks die in South LA and other disadvantaged communities because of peaker power plants, which do pollute the air. So being able to reduce the running of these peaker power plants by removing them would be really important to improving the health of their communities. But there's also other examples of how energy storage can help that already exist within LA specifically. Recently, LA built these cooling centers, which are solar powered, have energy storage. And when there are heat waves in LA, which are increasing in frequency, and when there's other sorts of disasters happening within LA, folks can actually go to these cooling centers and get the healthcare that they need. And then, as the question also mentioned, lots of hospitals do have these emergency backup power situations, and being able to equip more hospitals in more disadvantaged communities will, of course, be super helpful. And I'm a huge advocate of getting more renewable energy and energy storage there so that they can continue running even when there's a disaster happening.
Thanks, Dylan. Nick, I have another question for you. So as you've heard, our fellows are targeting a really wide variety of different stakeholders. So do you have any advice for how you would go about finding the correct stakeholders to which you should target your specific policy solutions?
I think all three have started to articulate who each of their stakeholders were or are, and kind of what are the messages and the materials that they intend to provide to them. And I thought that was really fantastic. In each case, if you spend enough time in those domains, you very quickly learn, who are the advocates, who are kind of the incumbent decision makers, whether it's a regulator or whether it's a funding source or what have you. So in the grid example, just to take one example out of the three, there's a set of folks who file regularly with the State Public Utility Commission, and there are folks who represent consumers, and then there are, of course, the utilities who tend to file there as well. That may work a little differently for a municipal utility like LAPDW, but generally speaking, there's a set of stakeholders that are well known once you go deep enough. And it sounds like all three fellows have immersed themselves not just in these 10 weeks, but also prior to really understand who those stakeholders are. And the trick is to understand and embrace all the existing ecosystem of stakeholders, recognizing the variety of their opinions and approaches, but also be welcoming to new voices. And that's always the trick, as you can kind of go native or go very deep on a particular sector and not realize that bringing other voices to the table can actually influence the policy debate.
Good answer, thank you. Dylan, I have another question for you. Actually, Nick mentioned the budget of your potential solution, and so we got a question that this seems like a very expensive solution, and can you go into a little bit more detail on how much you think this proposal would cost and how you would sort of justify this cost as part of your proposal?
Yeah. For the first recommendation, the Virtual Net Energy Metering Plus program, the numbers either go to $500,000 in savings annually for LA because of those avoided costs that have to do with avoiding upgrading the grid, up to $1 million in additional expenditure. So there's a big range here, and it depends on how owners of these apartment buildings competitively bid into participating to the program. But even with the $1 million that would be expended at the most extreme case, most of that would actually go toward, 40% at least would be going towards tenants. And so that would be a transfer of like financial assistance that the city of Los Angeles is already pretty invested in giving to them. And that would be really beneficial. For the second recommendation, deploying 115 megawatts of energy storage in disadvantaged communities, this would be very expensive, but we have to also remember that LA is planning to spend $90 billion on this energy transition. And so this is actually trying to refocus or like redirect a portion of those funds toward making sure that disadvantaged communities benefit more so than the status quo would guarantee. And also, I would say that there's billions of dollars being spent by the Biden administration, by California policymakers. So this would actually be able to help them harness that funding as well.
Definitely. Thanks for explaining that, Dylan. Elijah, my next question is for you. Could you give a couple more examples of student data misuse by edtech companies? And are there other edtech companies that have issues with student data privacy other than Google, which you mentioned in your presentation?
Yeah, sure. So again, the focus on Google is really because of how they've really become a critical part of the education infrastructure throughout this transition to digital learning that's really been expedited through the pandemic. So a lot of ed tech developers have to leverage Google's APIs in order to ensure that their products are accessible to school communities and classrooms. So some of the examples of case studies of student data misuse that I've mentioned are embedded in the policy brief to the New Mexico Public Education Department and highlighting examples of a school district in Florida that shared student data that was collected from these educational technology platforms that they were using with law enforcement officials to develop a predictive policing program that created profiles for students to flag them for the potential of engaging in criminal activities. And so, of course, this is tied to the well-researched school to prison pipeline that can be grown because of the unintended or adversarial uses of student data in these cases. So that's just one example, and there's more case studies available in the policy brief as well.
Awesome, thanks, Elijah. Nick, a question for you that we just got from the audience. Do you have any tips on how these types of policy changes can stay away from becoming partisan issues?
That's a great question. I think it, like the first thing that I would counsel is to make sure that you're talking to both sides of the aisle. A lot of tech policy issues are not partisan. Occasionally some do become them, and it's hard to walk them back once they've become a partisan issue. It requires more education and more staff work. But the easiest way to avoid something becoming partisan is to make sure that you are engaging with a wide range of folks, including political officials on both sides of the aisle, and figuring out what are the aspects of this that might appeal to them. And in all three of them, I can see elements that will appeal not only to the left, but also to the right. And so it's a matter of pitching your idea consistent with kind of their what they focus on and what they care about. And there are elements of each one of these that I think will appeal to different folks on both sides of the aisle. It's just about stressing those parts of the plan, I think. Ultimately, once you turn the cameras off and you spend time with staffers and even political officials, when the cameras aren't going, there's less grandstanding and more of a conversation. And if you take the time to understand what they care about and talk to people who have worked with them and worked for them, then you'll have a good sense of where that Venn diagram is. And it may be small, but at least you can understand the level of objection that one particular side may have.
So thank you for that advice, and hopefully that will help our fellows as they're moving forward with their projects. So my last question for today is a regular that we use to close out all of our Hub webinars. And that question is, what is the bumper sticker that you want folks to remember from today's event? So in other words, what is one brief, pithy message that you hope people take away from this discussion? And Sage, I will pass this to you first.
Thanks, Maeve. Mine's simple. Kids need internet at home. Very simple.
Awesome. Dylan, we'll go to you next.
Energy storage is just one tool for energy justice.
Awesome, thank you. Elijah, you're up.
Foster student data agency for future generations.
Awesome. And Nick, I'll pass it to you to give us the last one.
Act your bureaucracy with empathy.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And with that, I would like to close out today's event. So thanks again to Elijah, Sage, Dylan for all of the hard work you've been doing, and to Nick for joining us and sharing your insight. And I also would like to take a moment to thank the funders that make our fellowship program possible. They include the Craig Newmark Philanthropies, the Hewlett Foundation, Omidyar Network, Ford Foundation, and Schmidt Futures. I also want to thank our phenomenal team at the Hub that made this all happen. This includes our project manager, Meha Aluwalia, our deputy director, Mai Sisla, and our founder and director, Betsy Cooper. With that, this wraps our demonstration days for our Fall 2021 Fellows. Congrats again to all of the Fellows and the incredible work that they've all done. And if any of you are interested in seeing some of the past Fellow projects, please take a look at our website at aspentechpolicyhub.org/projects. In the upcoming weeks, we will also be announcing the winners of our Misinformation and Disinformation Challenge Grant, as well as projects from our Winter 2022 cohort of Tech Policy Fellows. Thank you all again so much for joining us, and we hope to see you in the future, and have a great rest of your day.